You are Alexander Kolovatov, a Soviet rescue team volunteer, tired after a full day of walking through deep snow in the Ural Mountains. The sun has set, and the temperature is hitting minus 30 degrees Celsius. You and your team are considering to abort the mission for the day, though you decided to take a few more steps to take a break near a large cedar tree before going back. But what and who you find next will be written down as the biggest unsolved missing persons case in history. That night, February 26, 1959, two bodies were found at the base of a large cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from an abandoned tent. They were found shoeless, dressed only in underwear despite freezing temperatures of around minus 40 degrees Celsius. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent. Another 4 bodies were found 2 months later buried under snow in a ravine about 75 meters from the tree. All of the bodies sustained severe internal injuries, skull fractures, broken ribs, missing tongues or facial tissue, and some of their clothing contained traces of radiation. 70 years later, this case still haunts investigators and remains unsolved to this day. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass. The initial group consisted of 10 people. All were experienced trained hikers. And before we get to the group's names, I need to say I am sorry if I pronounced them wrong. The group leader was Igor Dyatlov. The whole incident is named after his name. Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonishenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin, the only survivor to who we will get to later. The purpose of their journey was a Grade 3 hiking certificate. In 1959, this was the highest national sport achievement for hiking, and it required a challenging trek of over 300 kilometers in difficult terrain. Their destination was Mount Otterton, located deep in the northern Ural Mountains. The group was well prepared both physically and with their equipment. After all, it wasn't their first adventure. And each group member was highly skilled, most with previous Siberian expeditions. They were supportive of each other. The group shared duties and documented the whole journey. They also kept detailed daily journals and snapped over 36 rolls of film capturing their last moments. The group's journey starts on January 24th at Sverdlovsk, a major industrial city about 1,700 kilometers east of Moscow. Most of the group's members studied at a local school, so it made the most sense to start here. They traveled over 350 kilometers north to Ivdel by train. Then they continued by catching a truck to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement before the wilds. On the train and truck, they chat with locals, share laughs, and document everything by photo and diary. On January 27th, the group leaves Vizhai on foot and skis, heading for Mount Otterton. The weather turns harsh, heavy snow, wind, and rapidly dropping temperatures. Yuri Yudin turns back due to sciatica and illness, which caused joint pain and swelling. The group decided that it's safer for Yuri to go back home. That day, he parts with them warmly. This choice ultimately saved his life. A little fun fact: Yuri traveled to the location where the group's journey ended every year until 2013, when he passed away. January 28th to February 1st, the remaining 9 trek north through the forest. They carefully follow their planned route, ski across rivers, and set up camps. They take group photos, write humorous entries in their shared diary, and improvise songs in the cold evenings. Their spirits are high, and they are having fun. At times, progress is slow. The snow is deep and wind severe, but the team remains optimistic and determined despite the bad weather. On February 1st, the group plans to cross a mountain pass and reach a wooded valley camp protected from storms. We think that worsening weather and poor visibility forced them off course. They end up on the slopes of Kholat, Syakhl, that translates to Dead Mountain. Again, sorry for my pronunciation. Instead of descending to the forest, which would have offered shelter and firewood, they decide to camp on the open slope, perhaps for experience or because of exhaustion. Photos from this night show the group setting up their tent in deep snow and unpleasant weather. Here comes the first big question. Why did this group consisting of experienced hikers decided to camp under a mountain slope instead of a safer forest that wasn't that far away? On the night of February 1st to 2nd, based on diaries and the timeline, disaster struck after dinner. Sometime during the night, someone or something triggers panic. The group slashes open their tent from the inside and flees into the stormy sub-zero night. some barefoot, some half-dressed. First two found were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko under the cedar tree about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Both were dressed only in underwear, wearing just shirts without shoes or coats. Both had severe frostbite and minor burns, probably from an attempted fire. Dyatlov, Slobodin, and Kolmogorova were found between the tent and the cedar trees roughly 2 months after the first two discoveries, while being clothed slightly better than the first two. Dyatlov was found in an unbuttoned fur coat, sweater, pants, but without shoes. Zenaida had several shirts and a sweater on, one sock, and again no shoes. Rustam was wearing long-sleeved shirt, vest, pants, but only one boot. They all suffered hypothermia. Some had minor internal injuries, but Rustam had a bad fracture on his skull. Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, Lyudmila Dubinina, and Nikolai Brignol, or known as the Ravine Four, were found in a ravine buried under a thick layer of snow. They were clothed the best, and probably survived the longest, with a clear strategy going on. This technique of building a shelter under snow is a well-known survival technique used to survive cold nights. Zolotaryov and Kolevatov had extra layers on. Some clothing was likely taken from the dead, indicating they have survived the longest. Dubinina wore a brown sweater, underpants, 2 pairs of pants. She had also wrapped a piece of Krivonishenko's clothing on her foot. Thibaut Brignol wore a sleeveless shirt and underpants with a torn wool sweater and ski trousers. These two were clothed the best out of the group. Of these, Dubinina and Zolotaryov had suffered the worst internal injuries like rib fractures, and Brignola had a massive skull injury. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and lip tissues. Zolotaryov was missing eyes. When the bodies of the final 4 were recovered, Semyon Zolotaryov was reportedly found frozen with a pen in one hand and a small notepad in the other. The notepad was never filled. There were no written words, leading investigators to speculate. He probably intended to write down what was happening, but frozen before he could do so. This small but haunting detail suggests the group had some moments of awareness mid-chaos, perhaps trying to make sense or record events for posterity. There are 5 main theories people talk about, the first one being military weapons testing. This theory proposes the hikers became victims of secret Soviet military experiments in the area, possibly rocket tests or parachute mines. There are multiple witnesses from other hikers and meteorologists reporting seeing a bright orange orbs or fireballs in the sky the same night, so that might be why small traces of radioactive contamination were found on some clothing, right? Well, radiation may come from Krivonishenko's prior work at a nuclear plant. Investigator Lev Ivanov was allegedly pressured to downplay UFO or weapons explanations. The injuries, massive internal trauma with no visible wounds, are consistent with the blast wave of a mine or aerial bomb. Though there is no confirmed record of military tests in the exact area that night, and the bodies were not burned or torn as you'd expect from a close explosion. But due to the regime in the Soviet Union, allegations could be pushed back. That's why people keep this theory alive. Paradoxical undressing and hypothermia cascade. This theory can be explained, and it's probably the most likely to happen in a scenario like this. This natural explanation relies on medically observed effects of severe hypothermia. When body temperature drops extremely low, people can feel burning heat and irrationally remove clothing, or known as paradoxical undressing. The hikers, possibly startled by avalanche risk, may have become disoriented in the storm and got separated, and some snow might have fallen on their tent and they had to cut their way out of it. The ones that died near the fire might have survived for some time and tried to get warm. Others tried to return but collapsed, and survivors stripped clothing from the dead in a desperate attempt at warmth. But this theory does not fully explain the catastrophic internal injuries found on 4 hikers, or the missing tongue or eyes. The infrasound panic. This theory centers on infrasound, very low-frequency sound waves produced by wind interacting with the mountain's shape, or known as the Kármán vortex street effect. Infrasound can trigger intense anxiety, nausea, and panic attacks in humans. The idea is that a strong wind triggered infrasound, causing the group to panic, flee the tent irrationally, and become lost, exposed. As panic faded, they tried to survive but succumbed to the cold. Evidence for infrasound's psychological effects is mostly experimental and rare, and it does not explain the traumatic injuries or why experienced hikers remained so disorganized. The science slab avalanche theory. This theory also shows one of the more likely to happen scenarios. A 2021 scientific study found that the slope where the tent was pitched could allow a delayed slab avalanche. The hikers cut into the snowpack to pitch the tent, which destabilized the layer above. Several hours later, a small slab of snow may have broken off, pushing into the tent. Not enough to cover it completely, but strong enough to frighten and possibly injure some occupants. Fearing further collapse, they fled into the storm. 4 hikers suffered severe injuries either from the avalanche itself or later falling into a ravine. But no large avalanche debris was found even weeks later, and some survivors moved far from where most snowborne injuries would occur. A handful of more sensational theories persist, like the KGB or espionage. Some believe one or more group members, especially Zolotaryov, were involved in a covert operation, perhaps carrying radioactive materials. He was even carrying a camera that nobody knew of. Mansi attack. Some early speculation blamed local Mansi tribes for killing the hikers, but this theory was dismissed, and again there just wasn't supporting evidence, and the Mansi had no motive. Paranormal or Yeti theories were mainly popularized by the media. These suggest supernatural creatures or aliens were responsible, based on speculation and local legends. All these explanations lack convincing evidence, but persist due to the case's mystery and odd circumstances. So what now? The theories are out there, some more logical and scientific, others less, each one with a weakness as strong as the theory itself. Here is my personal opinion on what I think likely happened. Their end started with one fatal decision. After traversing forest and ascending the mountain, the group set up their tent on the exposed slope of Kholat Shakal Mountain, even though about 300 meters above was a flat, sheltered woodland. Why did they do it? They probably didn't want to lose altitude because the hiking certificates required minimum elevation, so descent meant extra effort and more time. During the night, some sudden event spooked the group and made them abandon the tent immediately, and they left it by cutting their way out rather than unzipping. It was probably a delayed slab avalanche, sudden wind blast, or a less likely but still possible sonic boom explosion. They made more mistakes, like cutting the tent from inside instead of leaving by the entrance. They were probably panicked and didn't think clearly, that lead to making more mistakes in separation. What about the injuries, though? Broken branches up to 5 meters were found, showing someone climbed the tree. They were probably seeking the tent or watching for help. They may have fallen and got injured, explaining the broken ribs or smashed skulls. The problem here is that multiple members of the group had similar injuries, or why were they separated? First 2 were found at the cedar, likely tried but failed to survive next to a started fire, dressed only in light clothes. They both probably died of hypothermia. 3 attempted return. Their bodies were found between cedar and tent, suggesting exhaustion or collapse from cold as they tried to get back for supplies or safety. Last 4 built a makeshift snow shelter in a ravine. It either collapsed or they fell through a snow bridge onto rocks below, suffering massive trauma. Let me know in the comments your opinions on this case. Was it just a bunch of wrong decisions that led to a catastrophe, or is something more hiding behind the missing 9?